President Joe Biden's nomination to lead the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Robert Califf, finds himself in a tough confirmation battle. He's fighting to secure enough votes to run the agency that is at the front line of the pandemic. The Revolving Door Project, along with the American Prospect, sounded the alarm on this back in October when they said Califf could have problems getting confirmed based on his history as a political consultant to Big Pharma and Big Tech. Executive Director at the Revolving Door Project, Jeff Hauser, joins us now to discuss. Welcome, Jeff.
Great to be here.
Tell us more about this nominee's background.
Robert Califf is the most generic FDA commissioner nominee that is possible, and that is because the FDA has long been a captured part of the federal government. It is Big Pharma's ally. It is how Big Pharma has become so profitable while innovations have slowed down generally. He is a doctor. He has all the right academic credentials, and he has all the right experiences. He has even led the FDA, but he has also been a consultant for Big Pharma. He has been a doctor performing studies that are controversial. He did a bad job at the FDA, and he is now working for a Google spinoff that wants to use your medical data in questionable ways. He is versatile in the revolving door around Big Pharma, using its connections to the federal government to be ever more profitable and to not work to serve the broader public interest. And so he is what you would normally expect from both political parties at the FDA, and the type of thing that gets voters of both political parties to be outraged.
Obviously, there's a lot of frustration with the FDA, the CDC throughout the pandemic. I think there's the correct concern that they were, didn't move hastily enough on a variety of fronts, even though the vaccines did come out very quickly. They were sluggish, not adaptive, confusing messages, all that sort of stuff. This is someone who's already been part of the agency. It probably doesn't speak to, or it would be difficult to address criticisms that this organization needs to change if they're going to put back in charge someone who was already in charge of it.
I think that whatever one thinks of the COVID responses of the FDA and how one parses out responsibility between the FDA, the Center for Disease Control, NIH, Jeffrey Zients, who's the COVID czar under Biden, and various Trump officials. I mean, there's a lot of blame to go around, and it was obviously a very complicated situation. But if you extrapolate just the bigger picture of why Americans are upset with Big Pharma and they're cynical of the government, you definitely see no reason to think Califf is going to be an agent of change. There are a handful of experienced FDA people who have a history of bucking against the culture of the FDA. Joshua Sharfstein is the most prominent among them. We don't tend to endorse any one specific people, and I do think there are other people who have had experiences at the FDA who might have that experience but also be against the general culture and could be agents of change. But I think there's no reason to think Robert Califf will be an agent of change at the FDA.
Yeah, it's really amazing to me that they're considering this person when the FDA is just riddled with problems at the moment. I mean, they've had two of their top vaccine czars that resigned in the fall because they were saying that, this was a rushed process. This wasn't, we didn't really thoroughly look at all the data before, recommending boosters to, or even the vaccine to young people. On top of this, there have been numerous studies done by numerous of our number of our academic institutions showing that the FDA doesn't have the best track record with about 30% of drugs that are approved. Eventually, they find out, there's all these other side effects we didn't really know about, and then they have to slap warning labels on those drugs, or they have to pull them. So, I mean, what are they even trying to address at all any of these issues? I mean, there is a huge amount of public trust lost for the FDA. I know I'm one of them. I'm somebody that used to look to the FDA and say, well, if it's FDA approved, it must be great. And then now, after doing more research and during this pandemic, sitting here like, I don't know anymore. I have to do all of my own research, I guess. The institution that's supposed to be doing it for me, I'm not certain about. Why are they not even attempting to correct these issues?
I think that there are two competing critiques of the FDA. Industry's critique is that actually they're not moving fast enough and they're asking too many questions. And we have to acknowledge that critique may not be our critique, but it is a powerful one among insiders who tend to focus on the FDA more regularly. And honestly, I am more sympathetic with that critique. I mean, I'm not sympathetic with that critique at all, but I think that vaccines and non-vaccines should be treated distinctly in how we think about the FDA. Generally speaking, pharma does not make its money from vaccines. They make it from drugs that they can give to wealthy people and get huge rates for to maintain and as they're addressing longstanding illnesses. Vaccines are not the main profit center for big pharma, and I don't think it's the archetypal case at which the FDA is bad. I think that I am more okay with how they have handled COVID stuff than I am everything else. But there are all sorts of drugs of dubious value that they try to rush through. And Califf has been the type of person urging them to move even faster to authorize drugs and to also help incumbent big pharma against generic drug participants. Like, the big issue is we have too many drugs being approved that cost too much, and we are moving way too slowly to get to generic drugs, which can do just as much good or and do so much more cheaply.
I mean, I have a similar criticism with them when it comes to the pandemic. I mean, as far as going slow with some approvals, it does seem like they favor certain pharma companies over others. And maybe it's to what you're speaking about, how it has become sort of this friendly arm to big pharma. But, you know, for example, Novavax has still not been approved. They submitted for their emergency use authorization last week. But that is because the FDA has been so hard on them compared to the other manufacturers, and we know that Novavax, being a very different type of vaccine than what's available out now, you know, would potentially help many of those who are hesitant. Maybe not everybody, but some of them. So, you know, I share that same criticism. I think I just it's mind-boggling that they're not trying to fix these inner problems that have been exposed for quite some time. They're more in the public spotlight now, I would say, but these are issues that people have been sounding the alarm on for a while inside of the FDA. And so who else do they have, and what are the chances this guy gets through?
I think right now, Califf's chances are poor because we're in a moment in which voters of both political parties are sick of corporate elites getting away with outrageous behavior that is either unethical, illegal, or both. And I think that Califf is in trouble. Joshua Sharfstein is the name that has been on short list, who would be most fit the brand of a reformer. There are potentially other people out there. I don't know what the Biden administration is doing. This pick is somewhat out of line with independent agency picks of theirs, like Lena Khan at the FTC or Rohit Chopra at the CFPB, people who are willing to take on corporate power. I understand that the people who tend to pay most frequent attention to the FDA tend to be corporate. They tend to be people like Califf, who have served as consultants to the big pharma companies. Another example I would bring up is the case of why America has such little access to tests compared to countries in Europe that have stringent standards. But in Europe, you could get tests very cheaply at the drugstore easily for COVID. And in the US, they pretty much had only 2 approved vendors, in part because of someone who used to be a consultant to the 2 vendors was the person in charge of determining approvals at the FDA. So,
yeah, I mean, this is a routine problem. You can find, I know it was the sunblock. There are like kinds of sunblocks, for instance, that you can find in Europe, elsewhere, that the FDA hasn't even thought about approving. There are other products like that, right? Sometimes they let through a product that's not good, and then the problem is then we all have to pay for it because it's approved by the FDA, then it has to be covered by insurance. It would be not. I mean, for me, a libertarian, it would be nice if there was some middle ground where, well, you're allowed to take this, but the society is not necessarily obligated to provide it for you because the benefit is dubious or not. But you should be allowed to take it. You just shouldn't be necessarily required by insurance. But that is a middle ground that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, toward that point, what would be best from a market perspective is that for things which are useful, there be actual competition to provide it. Mm-hmm. And so what we're dealing with is the worst of all worlds. You're having somebody put in a serious test for safety, which I am supportive of, but then they tend to just let 1 or 2 entities over the line. And they don't, potential competitors, or this is a better form of sunblock, but there are some sunblocks approved, and anywhere down the line, they're anti-competition. So you don't think of the Food and Drug Administration as an antitrust or anti-monopoly regulator. You tend to think of, oh, that's just the Justice Department's Antitrust Division or the Federal Trade Commission. But actually, the FDA and several other components of the federal government are key to determining what sort of options consumers have. So I'm all for stringent safety standards, but I'm also all for competition. And right now, we're having a situation in which the safety standards are not always the best when somebody offers something that they claim to be a unique product. And in areas where there clearly could be competition, the FDA is resistant to authorizing it.
And Jeff, a December 2020 Data for Progress poll found that 71% of voters across party lines agreed that the federal government should be doing more to punish corporations that break the law. And 83% of voters of all parties said they believe that regular Americans pay the price when the crimes of wealthy people and corporations go unpunished. And I also wanted to ask you a little bit more about the Google project that Califf is working on. What is Google up to, and how does this fit into how the public feels the FDA ought to be interacting with these massive corporations?
So first off, Data for Progress, we've worked with them, and they've been doing tremendous polling that shows people are very skeptical of corporate America and corporate elites. They don't think they are held to the same standards, and I agree with people of Republican, Independent, or Democrats alike on that matter. Verily is an Alphabet subsidiary, Alphabet being how Google is partially trying to rebrand itself as an institution. And they are one of these Silicon Valley approaches to healthcare, and they're going to try to use data crunching to, and they would say, make huge advances. I think we have reasons to be skeptical. I think the more you understand about individuals' health histories and the ability to potentially combine everything from their search history to data that different vendors might have, different pharmaceutical companies that CVS and other drug companies and pharmacy benefit managers might have, they can potentially create a situation in which there's enormous price discrimination against people, where people are charged different amounts for different products based off of vulnerabilities they have, which is the type of thing that's going to further erode opportunity for people who are less advantaged. It's very Big Brother-like to think that Silicon Valley is trying to data crunch our physical selves. I don't think there's any real reason that we should trust Silicon Valley. Their past promises on privacy have not been kept. And I think that if you have your former top guy at the Food and Drug Administration, that gives you a leg up. I mean, that is a sympathetic person. He knows you, they know him. If we're ever going to see Silicon Valley enter into the healthcare space, I want someone who is cynical, who must be persuaded that there's a real value add there and doesn't come pre-bought.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Hauser, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
More Rising after this.